Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new video. So I've got two popular lenses here, one very expensive and one a little bit cheaper. So basically I've got the Canon RF 100 to 500 f4.5 to 7.1 RF lens here. A very expensive lens, will set you back about £2,500. And here we have the popular EF 100 to 400 Mark II L lens, f4.5 to 5.6, so it's a little bit brighter. So I'm going to put up these lenses against each other, basically to find out which is the better, the sharper, and I think what we'll do is we'll do a like-for-like comparison. So what I'm going to do is we're going to test sharpness at 300mm, 400mm, and obviously this goes to 500 and this goes to 400. They're not quite as long. So in order to achieve some sort of similar sort of parity, what I'll do is I'll put my 1.4 extender on the 100 to 400 Mark II and get it to approximately 500mm, and then we'll be able to do a like-for-like comparison. Obviously we're dealing with a slight difference in aperture. This will be at 7.1, this will be at f8, but it'll give us an idea in terms of sharpness. Now I can sort this down to f8 to give us a like-for-like comparison as well, and we'll do that. But this video is all about testing these two out to see if they're comparable. Now, one thing that's been brought up on my Facebook group, please go and check that out, Canon lenses and cameras. I've been doing some live streaming as well. If you want to check my last one out, it's very interesting to actually learn about photography gear and other people's opinions. Now, something has been brought up on the Canon lenses and cameras group, that is the RF 100 to 400 is a little bit sharper than the EF 100 to 400 Mark II, just because it's closer to the sensor. Just because a lens is closer to the sensor doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a sharper lens. Now, Gordon Lang has done a comparison of the RF 100 to 400 versus the EF 100 to 400 Mark II, and basically you're getting a better aperture with the EF lens, and it's a tad bit sharper because it is L glass. Let's not forget about that. The RF 100 to 400 is not L glass. However, this is L glass, the 100 to 500 RF. So what we're going to do is take some test shots and we'll get an idea on which is the sharpest. Obviously there are other YouTubers out there who have done this sort of comparison, and their results suggest that the RF is a tad bit sharper, but it's so minor you won't notice it in real world pictures. So essentially the reason I got the RF lens was basically for its coupled with the RF cameras, we're going to get slightly better image stabilization, and I must admit it's a lot quieter. The stabilizer is quieter and the autofocus motor is a lot quieter because it uses dual nano USM, where the older lens is just a USM motor, and yes, you can hear it when you're actually focusing and doing video work. So for video, the RF 100 to 500 is actually better. Just like the old video that I did where I compared the 100 to 400 Mark II with a 2x extender versus the RF 800. The RF 800 is silent. This obviously creates a bit of noise, so if you're doing video work, that noise can be a bit annoying sometimes. However, on the RF version it is silent, almost. There is a bit of noise, but it's very quiet, very well controlled. So without further ado, let's check out the image quality pictures, and I'll get back to you in the conclusion part. I thought it'd be interesting to show you the controls first of all. So here we have a focus limiter, full 3 meters to infinity, autofocus and manual focus switch, stabilizer on and off, and stabilizer mode 1, 2 and 3. So 1 will be for any direction, 2 will be for panning, And the third one will be when you depress the shutter just to save on battery power. It's a good mode if you don't want the image to be stabilised in the viewfinder until the very last moment. And obviously here it comes with a tripod collar. This tripod collar is not removable, but obviously it can rotate. It's not declicked, so for horizontal and vertical you just have to use your best judgment or use something in the camera to get it, you know, vertically correct. And then the tripod foot here will come off. So if I just unscrew that, it does reduce the weight a little bit, not by much, but that's how it comes off. So it ain't completely removable. One thing I forgot to mention is this ring on the actual 100-400 EF lens has a smooth and tightening ring, so it allows you to change the actual resistance. As you can see, that flows quite well, and if we tighten it, it's a lot harder to move. So that's a good added extra to the EF lens, but it sometimes can be difficult to move that because it's quite smooth, that ring is. So moving on to the RF 100-500 lens, obviously we have extra focal length. We've got similar controls really, so basically we've got the same full 3 meters to infinity limiter, autofocus button there, autofocus and manual focus switch. We've got the stabilizer on and off and modes 1, 2 and 3. Looking at the tripod collar, I think it's probably a little bit better because obviously you can rotate it like you could on the other one, but if you keep doing that, it will come off like so. So you can remove the entire tripod foot completely off, and then just take some of that weight off completely. So in that respect it is quite a bit lighter. So in terms of weight saving, it's actually 300 grams lighter than the EF version. And obviously one thing I have noticed, and I don't know if you guys have noticed this in any other reviews, but the actual lens hood is a tiny bit bigger. If we put them side by side, you can see there's probably a centimetre difference there. And if you're wondering, yes, you can put the old one onto the new lens and it fits perfectly, no problem. So if you don't like the white one and you happen to get hold of a lens hood for the older 100-400 lens, you might like it better. One thing I did want to point out, I don't know if you can see that in the video, but you can see some felt. You can feel some felt in the old lens hood. In the new one, it's just plastic. There's no felt in there. So in terms of reducing reflections, the actual lens hood for the 100-400, this is the ET83D, it seems slightly better in my opinion. This one that comes with the 100-400, let's see if there's a model number on there, the ET83F W Mark III. Essentially I'd say there's a black ring at the bottom, presumably if you put it down not to scratch the white that's on there, but it's not rubber, it's just plastic. So you know, keep that in mind, that isn't rubber. You might think it is, but it's not. So in terms of construction, I actually prefer the Canon 100-400 EF lens in terms of its build quality. Now, one thing to note though, in colder climates, you might prefer the 100-500 because it's not metal, and metal conducts cold. And that could translate to actually putting cold into the elements as well. So obviously having a plastic lens, there is a little benefit there where cold won't be getting into the lens. So I just wanted to point that out in this little demonstration. And it's up to you to make your mind up in terms of build quality which you prefer. Like I said, this is a tiny bit lighter than this lens. You can feel the difference there. But if you would like me to give you a weigh in, we can do that. Right, so we've just got the Canon 100 to 500 RF lens here. I just want to briefly talk about the various controls on there. First of all, something I haven't mentioned is the control ring here, which you can get declicked. And I think it's a fee of £150 to get it declicked by Canon. That you can use that to control various options on your camera, such as exposure, shutter speed, and various other things you can assign to it. So obviously, it's very similar to the 100 to 400 Mark IIL EF lens, where we've got a limiter here, goes from full to 3 meters to infinity. We've got a autofocus and manual focus switch. We've got a stabilizer on and off switch, and we've got a stabilizer mode 1, 2 and 3 switches here. 1 is for any direction, 2 is for panning, and 3, despite what other people have said, and it's not for erratic subjects, it's to save on battery power. So when you press the shutter, the stabilizer will come on and work fine. So here we have a tripod collar, which is removable. So we just need to untighten it, and then it will unlock. We can take that off, and obviously that is the tripod collar that is removable. It isn't clicked, just like the 100 to 400 EF lens. So obviously you have to use your best judgment, or there is a marker on there to tell you whether you're in landscape or portrait mode, and obviously it can go on quite easily as well. The filter diameter is 77mm, and there is a smooth and tight ring for making it harder to move the focus, to zoom it out, sorry, to keep it in its correct position. So obviously that's loose, quite easy to move and rotate. You can tighten it where it's stiffer. It doesn't seem to jerk as much as the EF version, and unlike the 100 to 400 EF lens, which doesn't have any contours on the actual tightening ring, this does, and makes it easier to grip, but it is plastic, not metal, obviously. Obviously this is the zooming ring for zooming it in and out, and that's the focus ring, which is a bit smaller for manual focus than the EF 100 to 400, but I just wanted to briefly show you the lens and the various options on it. Obviously the focus limiter is full, which can focus very close, and obviously 3 meters to infinity. I believe at above 300mm the minimum focus is 1.2 meters, but it does get down to 90 below 300mm, in terms of 90 centimeters, that is. So it can focus a tad bit closer than the EF 100 to 400, but at 400mm obviously it's a bit further away. So there are some benefits and some disadvantages. So on the screen I will put a graph to tell you about actually the aperture, how it changes in terms of where you lose your 5.6 aperture. Typically at 363mm, I believe it is, on the RF 100 to 500, you will lose your 5.6 aperture and it will go to 6.3. And then obviously when you get nearer to the 500mm range, you have to bump that aperture up to 7.1. So essentially, I just wanted to show you the lens in more detail. Essentially, it's very similar to the Canon 100 to 400 EF L lens in terms of its capabilities. Obviously it is plastic, so it will you know, prevent the cold getting into the lens a bit more than say the 100 to 400. But I just wanted to show you the lens in closer detail. Okay, let's do a bit of a weigh-in here. So I've got a plastic bag here, and we'll put the lens in the bag. This is the 100 to 400 Mark II-L. Got a weighing scale here, and let's just weigh it in by turning it on. Okay, we're going to weigh it in kilograms. Let's just weigh this up and then lift it up and see what we've got. So 173. So just turn that back on. So let's just get hold of the RF 100 to 500. You see the RF for 500 going in the bag, so we can weigh it. It's in the bag there. Let's turn this on and off. So you can see it's at 0. It's at 0 now. Just attach that there. Let's see what we've got. Okay, 1.63. So as you've seen, the weight difference is about 1500 grams, which is not significant in the real world, but it depends on how much weight you can handle. Okay, so here we have the 100-400 Mark II EF lens set to 300mm, just to give you a comparison in terms of speed. So like I said, all we need to do is defocus the lens and see how it does. Fairly quick. Do it the other way around. So we're going to infinity. Fairly quick. Minimum focus again. Defocus. Fairly quick. So let's try the same test at 400mm. So defocus it to its minimum. Fairly quick. And go to infinity and see how it does there. While it is fairly quick, it's not quick as the RF lens, as you can see there. Right, I'm just showing you the RF 100 to 500 lens in terms of its focus speed, in terms of acquisition. So I'm just going to defocus the lens. To do this we go into manual focus, and I'm just going to defocus it and then turn it back into autofocus and then press your shutter, and that will show you how quick it autofocuses at 500mm. As you can see, it's really quick. So let's do the same test at 400mm. Make sure we're focused in, and then we just need to put it back into manual, defocus the lens and try again, and then put it back into autofocus mode and see how quick it does at 400mm. As you can see, lightning quick on the RF 100 to 500. So let's just try that again at 400mm. I'll defocus it again, but to do that we need to go to manual focus, defocus it. I'm moving the focusing ring to the right. So let's just see how that does. Put it back into autofocus mode and press the shutter. As you can see, lightning quick. So let's try that again. Put it back into manual focus. This time I'll move the focusing ring to the left. So it defocuses it. And let's just put the autofocus back on and press the shutter. Lightning quick again at 400mm. And this is where the 100 to 400 Mark II EF-L lens was quite slow at 400. So even if I go all the way in at 500mm, we just
put it to manual focus, defocus it again, and press the shutter. Put it to autofocus, then press the shutter. Try again. There you go. There's a little bit of a hesitation there. You know, sometimes lenses do hesitate from time to time. Let's try that again. Put it into manual again. Defocus. Put it back into autofocus mode and press the shutter. And there you go. It's at 500mm. It does hesitate a little bit, but it's certainly quicker than the 100 to 400 Mark II-L was at 400mm. So there you go. That's how quick it performs. Right, we're on the R6 with the 100-500 RF lens, so let's see how the in-video focus works. From time to time we do seem to miss it. Okay, that's the R6. Right, we're on the 100 to 400 Mark II-L lens on the R6. So let's just see how the focus performs.
So on conclusion, I think if you've got the money, get the RF version, but if you're on a tighter budget, get the EF version. I've just sold this EF version, so we'll be sending that off for £1,300 on eBay. However, this lens set me back on eBay £2,500. So there's a £1,000 difference there. It's up to you if you think it's worth spending that extra. I do, because it's a nice sharp lens. So, thanks for watching, do appreciate it. Please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.
Hello everyone, right, let's get on with looking at some images at 300mm ISO 2000 on the EOS R at f5.6. I've got a selection of real world images. It's not completely scientific, this test, but it'll give you an idea on sharpness and what you can achieve with the lens. So we'll take some samples at 300mm and we'll start off with the EF 100 to 400 Mark II-L lens, and let's have a look at the sharpness on, we're using Photoshop to have a look at these images, so let's just have a look in there. Looks nice and sharp on the 100 to 400. There you go, 200%. We seem to be focusing this area here, and yeah, it looks nice and sharp. I like it. No major problems there. So let's go on to the next image, which is a similar image, which is the 100 to 500 RF lens. Let's go in there and have a look. I think I'm focused more in this area here, this top part here. So let's just zoom in. Again, going at 200%. Looks nice and sharp. No major problems. They both seem to be producing really good results. So let's have a look at the next image. So I have my Gandalf wizard ornament in the garden. I thought it'd be interesting to take some pictures of this. So obviously that's the 100 to 400 image. This is the RF 100 to 500 set at 300mm. All these images are at 300mm, and as you can see, if you compare them, they look just as good as each other. But as always, I like to zoom in there into the eye area where I'm focused, just to get an idea of the sharpness at 100% there. Let's have a look at the RF lens. Go in there at 100%. So that's the RF version. This is the EF version. There's no major problems there. Let's zoom in there at 200%. obviously this is a 30 megapixel camera, just remember that. So that's the EF version, and zoom in there on the RF version. So we compare both images, both seem to be as sharp as each other. May see a slight boost in sharpness, very minor though, so minor you can't tell. It might seem a bit more contrasty, but they're both as good as each other. You know, you would really struggle to realise which was taken on which lens. So that's the RF and that's the EF. So let's move on to another image. So I've got a duck ornament outside. Looks nice and reasonable with the 100-400. I'm not completely sure I got the focus bang on here because it does seem a tad bit soft. That could be me, not the actual not the actual the lens taking the picture. So obviously take these images with a pinch of salt. So that's the RF version and that's the EF version. What I have noticed is the image stabilization on the RF lens is more effective. So we could potentially have a tiny bit of camera shake in there. That's why it's not completely as sharp as the RF version. So let's go to another image that I've got here, which is a water bot outside with a bit of text. And I've just thought it'd be a good idea to have a look at some text, because that's where you can see how well lenses perform, because you can zoom right into the text and have a look at sharpness. So I'm going to choose the S area here to zoom in. Let's first look at the RF version. I think I was a tad bit closer in the RF version in terms of distance. So just take that with a pinch of salt. So that's the RF version. This is the EF version. Let's zoom in there a little bit just to get a bit of an idea on how well it performs. Do the same here with the RF version. They look as good as each other at this distance. However, what I have noticed is that if I zoom in a bit more, you will see a slight difference in sharpness. So if we go here, doesn't quite seem quite as sharp as the RF version, because in the word ward here you can see lines in the text pattern here, which means it's resolving a lot of quality resolution. When we look at the 100-400, it's not as well defined. In fact, you can't really see that pattern at all in this word ward here, which sort of indicates to me that the RF lens is a tad bit sharper. Is it going to be a deal breaker for you guys? Probably not, but I thought it was important to make you aware of the difference. So we zoom in a bit more in there to make it similar. Obviously you can see that's the EF version, this is the RF version, and obviously it just looks a tad bit sharper. That's generally speaking what you will come to understand. That the RF lens is a tad bit sharper, but are you going to notice it in the real world? Probably not. So it's all about diminishing returns, how much you're willing to get that extra sharpness. You know, you're talking about maybe a £1,500 you know, used 100-400 EF lens that you can pick up off eBay versus a £2,500 lens that you would have to buy brand new, obviously. And it's a lot more in local shops as well. I got it for £2,500 in shops. It is about near enough £3,000. So that's the RF, that's the EF. So I just wanted to give you a brief idea on sharpness at 300mm. Let's move on to 400mm next. So in this segment I've got some images at 400mm. Let's have a look at the quality that we're getting from the EF lens. So obviously looks nice, no major problems. Let's just zoom in there at 100%. Looks nice and sharp on the EF 100-400 Mark II. No problems there. Let's jump over to the RF image. Looks nice and sharp. Zoom in there at 100%. Looks nice and sharp. Very similar images. So let's just pop over to the 100-400 Mark II. Nice and sharp, no major problems. I think it's at aperture 6.3, these images, the majority of them. and that looks nice as well. So obviously, if we might need to just to give it a bit of parity, because I might be a bit further away on the 100 to 400 image. Zoom in there a little bit, looks nice and sharp. And again on the RF 100 to 500. So let's have a look at the next image. So I just thought I'd take a picture of a brick wall to see how distortion looks at 400mm. Looks well controlled, no major issues there. Let's just zoom in there a little bit more at 100%, and that's the EF 100 to 400. It's up to you to make your mind up which you prefer, but in terms of costs, I think you're going to be quite happy with the 100 to 400 if you're not prepared to pay out the massive amount of money you need to spend on the RF version. So let's zoom in on the RF 100 to 500 here, and get that to 100%. So that's the RF 100 to 500, and that's the EF 100 to 400. To my eye, I think the RF is a tad bit sharper, but that's to be expected because it's a lot more expensive and a newer lens. So that's the EF 100 to 400, and that's the RF 100 to 500. I don't see a lot of distortion going off in both lenses, well controlled. So let's have a look at the next image. So the next image, basically I've just got an Olympus lens sat on the top of my pond, and I thought we'd have a look at sharpness on that. So that's the 100 to 400. This is the RF 100 to 500 at 400mm. Both, all these images at 400mm. I just wanted to get an idea on quality between the two lenses. So obviously we can zoom in there a bit more at 100%. So that is the RF 100 to 500, and this is the 100 to 400 EF, and let's go in there 100%. So that's the EF version, which looks nice and sharp. Not quite as sharp as the RF version when we crop in 100% there. So that's the 100 to 500, and that's the 100 to 400. So it gives you an idea on the difference between the two. It just seems a tad bit sharper where that red dot is versus the the 100 to 400 EF version. So the next image, again we're doing another picture of the Gandalf ornament in my garden. So that's the that's 400mm at the 100 to 400, and that's the 100 to 500 at RF at 400mm. So obviously you can tell the difference there between the two. Make up your own mind which you think is the better. Just zoom in there 100% on the RF version and on the EF version 100%. So looking at the detail, it just seems a very tiny bit sharper on the RF version. It's not by much though. So if you're thinking, am I going to tell the difference? Unless you're going to zoom in 100%, 200%, 300% into certain parts of the image. The majority of these images are at ISO 2000, by the way. So yeah, that's the RF version and that's the EF version. So let's move to the next image. So I've got a eagle statue in my garden. This is stone, and I thought it'd be interesting to get a close-up look at that. So that's the 100 to 400 EF, and this is the 100 to 500. It's slightly different, so I do apologise. I must have deleted an image, a similar image, or I might have been standing in a slightly different place. Sometimes it's hit and miss sometimes when you're doing these tests. But let's zoom in there at 100%. That's what we're getting from the EF 100 to 400 lens. Looks nice and sharp. And let's move to the RF version at 100%. Again, looks nice and sharp. If we're comparing both of them, I think they're really hard to tell the difference here. It's up to you to make your own mind up. That's the RF version, and that's the EF version. So the last image I've got in this segment here is I thought I'd take a picture of the Olympus lens indoors. So I think this is at 4000 ISO and the RF is set to 8000 ISO, mainly because I think it's 5.6 versus 6.1 in terms of the aperture, but we can have a look at that. So if we go to file info on the EF version, says it's 100-400, 1/50th of a second. This is on a tripod. 6.3 ISO 4000 on the EOS R, and we'll have a look at the other image, which is a similar sort of image. Again, file info. See EOS R, the RF 100-500, 400mm at 7.1. So it's a slightly darker aperture we're at here. That's just because of the lens makeup of how this lens is slightly darker than the EF version. So if we just have a look at the images, looks nice. The 100-400 Mark II, no major problems there. And we'll just have a quick look at the RF version. Again, nice and sharp, no major problems there. It's up to you to make up your mind which you think is the sharper. At closer distances like this, I don't think you're going to tell much of a difference. At longer distances, you might be able to tell a tiny bit of slight differences. But yeah, that's the EF version and that's the RF version. So I just thought I'd give you a rough rundown of various images to show you examples. Hopefully this video is going to be helpful. So welcome to this segment. I've just got some test chart images for you to have a look at. Unlike a lot of YouTubers out there, I like to do test chart images so you can have a look for yourself to see how well these lenses perform. There is a slight difference in ISO, however, on the EOS R, on the 100-500 RF lens. I've got it set to ISO 2000. I couldn't locate the images at 1000 ISO, unfortunately. So, you know, unfortunately there will be a slight difference in terms of images. On the EF lens it's ISO 1000, on the RF it's ISO 2000. Just take that with a pinch of salt, that there may be slight differences. So this is at 6.3 on the EF 100-400. Let's just have a look at that. In the center, 100%, looks nice and sharp. F 6.3 in the corners, that's what it looks like. Make of that what you will. So let's have a look at the EF version at 6.3, sorry, the RF version at 6.3. Let's zoom in there at 100%. It looks quite reasonable. Obviously there is a difference with the ISO being 2000 in this one versus 1000 again, but it looks pretty good on the RF lens, no major problems. Let's move on to the EF at f8. Again, let's go in at 100%. Looks nice and sharp and crisp, no major problems. And obviously that's what it looks like in the bottom corner. So I'll look at the RF at f8. Have a look in the center there at 100%. Looks fairly nice, no major problems. Obviously this is ISO 2000 versus 1000. So it would be a tad bit sharper if I was at 1000 ISO. But again, we're getting good detail, no major problems there. So let's move on to the EF lens at f16. So I'll look at the center. Looks nice and sharp at 100%. Let's just move down to the bottom corner, see how sharp it looks. It looks really nice, no major problems there. So let's move on to the RF lens at f16. Seems to be okay, no major problems there. Let's zoom in there at 100% so you guys can make of that what you will. Looks nice, no major problems. Let's move down. I don't see any sort of issues with chromatic aberration or distortions, so both lenses give us a solid performance on the test charts, so I do not think you would be disappointed with any of these lenses. So let's move on to some real world images that I've got here. So this is the 100-400 Mark II lens on the R7, so it's an APS-C camera, so obviously it's going to be a bit more zoomed in terms of what you're actually getting in terms of the focal range. As you can see, it looks nice and sharp. I've done the same on the RF 100 to 500, a slight different angle, but I've tried to get it as close as I could. And this is just basically one of my Star Trek models that I've got. This is a Klingon Vulture cruiser, and that's the RF lens. Again, it's using the R7, so obviously it's a bit more cropped in. Crop sensor camera, 32 megapixel. So that's the EF 100 to 400, and that's the RF 100 to 500 at 400 millimeters on the lens, that is. So let's zoom in a little bit into that at 100%. Let's see the quality. Do see to have some dust around it, so obviously you can see some fine detail of various things on top of it, because I didn't notice I had a lot of dust on this model unfortunately. So again, obviously that's 100% zoomed in on the R7 100-400 Mark II L lens. Let's have a look at the RF lens, zoom in there at 100% so you can have a look at the quality again. So that's the R7, the RF 100 to 500, zoomed in, looks nice and crisp. Both look very good. I'd just say the RF 100 to 500 is a tad bit sharper, but it is so small, you'd have a hard time trying to figure out which is the better lens if you owned both side by side. So either lenses are fantastic for doing great work. So I'll look at another image I've got on the R7. I thought I'd take a picture of a teddy bear. This is the 100 to 400 Mark II L lens. Again on the R7. So obviously it is cropped in a bit. And that's the RF 100 to 500 at 400 millimeters. Both look really good. Let's zoom into the eye. That's where I'm focused. At 100%. That's 100% on the R7. On the 100 to 400, and let's have a look at the eye on the 100 to 500. You can actually see dust on the eye actually there. So that's the 100 to 400, and that's the RF 100 to 500. Both very good images. It's up to you to take away from this video if you think it's giving you good results, whichever lens you decide you want to purchase. Obviously there's a big price difference in these two lenses, so that's the 100 to 400 on the R7, and that's the 100 to 500. It does look a tad bit sharper on the 100 to 500 if I'm honest with you, on a challenging APS-C camera body like the R7 at 32 megapixels. So I've got a little bit of a treat here for you. I've decided to have a look at some images on the 100 to 400 Mark II L lens with the 1.4 extender, the EF Mark III extender. A lot of people will be comparing putting extender on the 100 to 400 to make it close to what you would get with the 100 to 500, and just live with that because it's a cheaper combination than buying a 100 to 500 RF lens. But I thought we'd have a look at quality with the 1.4 extender versus the 100 to 500 RF lens at 500 millimeters. So I've got it as close as the code. So basically on the 100 to 400 Mark II, it's set to around 490 millimeters versus 500. So we've got similar sort of focal length, hopefully, and I can give you a rough comparison in terms of image quality of the both setups. So having a look at this image, this is 100 to 400 with the 1.4. Let's have a look at sharpness. Let's go in there at 100%. Looks nice and sharp, no major problems there. So let's have a look at the RF 100 to 500, set to 500 millimeters. I've tried to get them around f8 on both lenses, so you've got like a similar sort of aperture, ISO around 2000 on the EOS R. So let's just zoom in there on the pagoda that I've got here at 100%. Looks nice and sharp. So let's compare the two images briefly. So that's the 100 to 400 and that's the 100 to 500. Let's zoom in a little bit more to see if it sort of gives it some sort of parity in terms of the sizing of the image. So that's the RF, and that's the 100 to 400. Both look really good. So let's have a look at the next image we have here, which is one of my teddy bears. This is the 100 to 400. Let's just move over to the 100 to 500 at 500 millimeters, comparing them. Let's zoom in there a little bit. I was focused on this area, but it does seem to have missed the focus a little bit. If we go in at 100% there, that's the sharpness you're getting. For some reason, it seems to have wandered over here for some reason. The 100 to 500, if we go back here, 100%, looks nice and sharp there and crisp, and you can even see the dust on the eyes really well. I don't know what happened there, but it was off a little bit, I guess. So have a look at the next image, which is obviously the Wizard. So I've got the 1.4 extender on the 100 400 here. Looks pretty nice, no major problems there. Here's the RF 100 to 500. Again, looks nice, no major problems. You know, you be the judge of which you think is the better. Let's zoom in there at 100% on the 100 to 400 with the 1.4 extender Mark III. Looks nice and sharp. And looking at the 100 to 500, let's zoom in there at 100% as well. Let's see if we can see any sort of difference. I'm really struggling to tell the difference between the two, if I'm honest with you. 500 millimeters versus 490 millimeters, because that's the closest I could get it when I was trying to do it on the lens. But again, you know, it's really hard to tell the difference. Let's go into 200%, see if we can see a real difference. RF 100 to 500 here, and this is the 100 to 400 with the 1.4 extender on. So again, the difference is so close you can't tell the real difference. You know, if we look at the detail on the nose here, there might be a tad bit more detail on the 100 to 500, but it's so minor, the differences, I don't think you're going to tell it. So, you know, in hindsight, maybe I should have kept my 100 to 400 instead of selling it and getting the 100 to 500. So, let's have a look at the next image here. This is the 100 to 400 Mark II with the Mark III 1.4 extender on there. Looks nice, no major problems with the quality. I'm a bit more zoomed in here because I didn't quite marry the actual focal range or distance properly, but it looks nevertheless quite good. Let's see if we can get it in a bit more to see if it can get a similar. So yeah, that's the 100 to 400. Looks nice and sharp. That's the 100 to 500. Seems to be a slight bump in contrast on this particular image. I know the images are not completely the same because the sun did move while I was doing this, but it's up to you to make your mind up which you think is the better. That's the RF one, and that's the EF one. EF, RF. So let's zoom in a bit more. 100% there, 100% there. Well, it's around 66%. That gives us a similar sort of field of view. I'd say give it a slight edge to the 100 500, but they're so close. They're really close. I'm struggling to see any difference, if I'm honest with you. There's a slight difference. It's up to you to make your own mind up. Alright, next image. So here's my eagle statue in the garden. I thought it'd be a good idea to have a look at the sharpness, hopefully get a similar sort of image, and we have. So, you know, I've done really well there to get a similar sort of view on both lenses. So again, it's around 2000 ISO at f8. So that's the RF 100 to 500. That's the EF 100 to 400. You know, again, I'd say there's a slight edge to the 100 to 500 versus the EF. Let's just zoom in there a bit more. 100% on the EF lens. Let's go to the RF lens and zoom in there 100%. Obviously it's a 30 megapixel EOS R camera, so that's the RF 100 to 500, and that's the EF 100 to 400. There is a slight bump, very slight bump in image quality here. You can see the difference there. So obviously the 100 to 400 there, the 100 to 500 just looks a tad bit crisper at 500 millimeters. Obviously it's f8 versus f8, but it is so close. But again, we're having to pixel peep 100% and zoom in there to see the major difference. Overall, the RF lens is sharper. There's no doubt about that. But it's so close. If I zoom out, let's zoom out to 66%. Zoom out to 66%. Can you tell the difference now? It's so close. I can barely see it. So I just hope this round of assessing the image quality has given you a firm idea on which is the better. Is it worth upgrading, or is it worth keeping the older lens and just carrying on? It's up to you to make your own mind up. I just want to say a big thank you. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video. I put a lot of work into this, so I would really appreciate that. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.